Welcome, everyone, to the Just Steward Podcast. I'm Doug Conley, and I'm here with my co-host, Michael Fergan, and our guest, Jeremy Beer. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing good.
Great to be on here with you guys.
Excellent. And then for those of you who don't know, we're a podcast that explores how to prepare the next generation spiritually, intellectually, and materially. And we're going to jump it off with someone who's an expert at an arena that you might not think of as being needing professional expertise, which is philanthropy. So Jeremy, our guest, has a pretty extensive resume. He is quietly a very, very interesting guy. So I'm going to read
Only
off.
quietly.
I've known Jeremy for a while, so I'm going to list off from memory some of the. First, I'll start with the big thing. Jeremy is the co-founder of AmPhil, formerly American Philanthropic, which assists in fundraising and philanthropy consulting. And also, Jeremy is an author of books ranging from philanthropy, the history of philanthropy, to the exploration of Arizona by Franciscan friars, to forgotten Negro League baseball players from the state of Indiana, where Jeremy and I both hail from. And also, Jeremy serves with the Center for Civil Society as well. And I don't know what that is. I'm not talking about, I don't know what the Center for Civil Society is. I don't know what civil society is these days, Jeremy.
We can get to that.
Yeah. The Center for Civil Society, I've got some familiarity with that. So I think I covered the big ones, Jeremy. Anything I forgot?
No, that's plenty. Thank you.
Well, if you want to know more about Jeremy, the best places to go, amphil.com and thejeremybeer.com. That's got all his books. Jeremy, I want to kick it off with, we want to get the floor to be given to the subject of philanthropy today. People don't think of philanthropy as a business, for lack of a better term, or something that requires professional behaviors management. How did you get into this space, and what need did you see to be filled?
Yeah. Well, so I got into this space by starting to work for a nonprofit organization called the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, which some listeners might be familiar with, based in Wilmington, Delaware, back in whenever that was, 2000. And so I worked at a nonprofit, working my way up there. The first thing everybody that you don't usually think about maybe, but everybody should know is like a nonprofit is a business. It's just a business organized under a different section of the tax code. It's a business in which nobody owns equity and nobody owns shares, right? But other than that, it's a business. And so like any business, it could be run well or it could be run poorly. It can bring in a lot of revenue, it can bring in very little revenue. It can spend wisely or not spend wisely. So it can have a lot of impact. It can have very little impact. So kind of learn that when you start to get into the nonprofit space. And then my co-founder, Jeff Kane, and I founded American Philanthropic in 2008, 9, I guess we say 2009. It was the very end of 2008, beginning of 2009, in part because we had learned a lot about the space in our time at ISI and seen we could see that a lot of the nonprofits in the more sort of conservative space or faith-based spaces could really use some help, especially in the area of generating revenue in raising money. And that not a lot really seemed to know how to do that very well. Not that we had all the answers, but we had learned a few things. Jeff especially had learned a lot. I had learned a little. And we also saw that the consulting sort of in professional services space was not well defined. The people would charge a lot of money to not do much work, basically. And we thought we could do better. So that attract those two things, the possibility of helping organizations whose missions we believed in grow so that they could have more of an impact, that was attractive. And it was also attractive that there didn't seem to be a ton of competition in a well-defined space. So that is how I sort of got into this sector and have been growing AmPhil ever since. There's two sides of that then. One is on the philanthropy side, helping organizations, nonprofits raise more money and all the things that go with that. And the other side is helping donors give more. I want to say give more effectively, but that's a little narrower than what I mean. In a way that
more prudently, maybe.
What's that?
More prudently.
More prudently, I would say. How about more fruitfully? I would say give more fruitfully. So that's the other side of what we do. So we see philanthropy from sort of both sides, the givers and the givees.
Do you do any consulting with the actual philanthropic organizations, like the nonprofits themselves, in terms of how they manage, or are you primarily how to give from the donor end and how to receive, or how to raise money? So
mainly on the management? Yeah. So, but when you say how to manage, what do you mean how to manage their money?
Well, for instance, if a nonprofit came and said, okay, you can help them raise money, but do you have anything to do with how they operate their nonprofit?
So we're less of really not like management or operations gurus. I think we can speak into that from the perspective of what donors are looking for. We pick up some things along the way, especially if you're building a company like we have, but that's not really our area. We try to stick to our lane, which is helping you raise more money. And that can mean a lot of things. It means for everything from capital campaigns to direct mail, so like very specific fundraising things, to getting your CRM set up the right way so that you manage your donor database effectively. Often data is a big challenge for people. And then it does mean strategy. So we do like strategic plans with organizations that go beyond fundraising. They're organizational strategic plans, but we don't get into the weeds of really like management and operational.
Okay. And when it comes to strategic plans, I think with a lot of things, I kind of look at acting as a classic example. I don't know what good acting is, but I know what bad acting is when I see
Yeah.
it. So sometimes it's easier when you're not an expert on a subject. It's easier to define what it looks like when it's done badly.
Yeah.
So let's start with the givers. When the
Mhm.
people are giving, what are mistakes that say you're consulting with a
Yeah.
large family or that has legacy wealth and they want to give with an impact? What mistakes do you see made, especially if they have common values as you do as
Yeah.
a fellow Catholic with us? Maybe they're Christian, generally speaking. Maybe they're Catholic in specific.
Yeah, good question. So it obviously starts with let's start with the general point, which is that we are not all called to give in exactly the same way to the same things. So there is not just one rule for giving, except for perhaps that we're supposed to give, and they probably give more than we are, to give until it pinches. I think it's a Hopkins line, I think, Gerard Manley Hopkins, something like that. So you have to start with the individual family, let's say we're talking about. What do they feel called to do? It's almost impossible to consult in this way. I mean, we have to do it sometimes, but really it's hard to do it without getting theological. And it's almost, I would say, spiritual, maybe even more than theological. Like what do you feel called to do? What is your particular vocation? What opportunities has God brought in front of you? To use it in a more evangelical language, what has he laid on your heart, right? That is because we all are called to do something different. So if you haven't gone through a real discernment process, that's one mistake. Have you gone through a really prayerful, thoughtful discernment process, first of all, on what it is you think what God has called you to do as givers specifically? Another mistake is not then once you've done that, okay, are you giving? How much should you give? Is a question to answer. What and to what should you give? Or is your current giving aligned with what it is you feel like you're called to do? Oftentimes it's not, right? Well, I'm actually giving 40% of our charitable money away just to like organizations that, it's kind of random. Somebody brought them to my attention. It's another donor kind of wrote me in, but it really doesn't align with what I'm trying to accomplish. So that's one mistake is not really being fully aligned or fully aligning your giving with your vocation. Another, I can keep going on the mistakes for a while, but I'll give you a couple more. What do you mean by impact? I think this gets back to the vocation, right? There is sometimes a desire to too tightly control the results of our giving or to measure impact in too narrow a way. So what do I mean by that? Christian thinking is different than utilitarian thinking. These are not the same thing. And yet I see a lot of Christians basically thinking like utilitarians when they give. I want to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. Great. That's a perfectly wonderful utilitarian way of thinking. That is not a Christian way of thinking. And it's not necessarily bad, but it's not distinctively Christian. That may not be, for instance, you can do the greatest good for the greatest numbers. The effective altruism argument might be through providing mosquito nets in a particular malarial area of Southeast Asia. But that may not be what you are called to do. The effective altruist would say like, well, you're wrong. We're all obligated to give where we do the greatest good for the greatest number. But that is not the Christian way of thinking. We are called to give in the way that God has called us to give, which we can only discern through prayer and through, I guess, becoming as virtuous as is necessary to be attuned to what God is calling us to do, right? So sometimes, anyway, a long way of saying, a rambling way of saying, sometimes we get like sucked into utilitarian practice. And then what's the last thing I would say a mistake is not trusting in leaders as much as we should, and tying their hands maybe by restricting our gifts too narrowly. I want to give to you, but I want it to only be for this. Yet I want to give to you, but I want it. It's got to be under these conditions and why. And sometimes that's fine, and sometimes that's maybe what we're asked to do. But I think the most givers are the most gratified and satisfied when they identify leaders and build relationships with those leaders that they believe in and trust, and then give to them with as few restrictions as possible and see what happens as a result.
On that last point, would you say that you're kind of trying to frame it as you're giving to people rather than giving to a cause, or is that not the right way to say
No,
it?
that's not a bad way of putting it, although you wouldn't be given to people regardless of the cause, right? I think I would say more, actually, I probably would say more, I'm giving to a combination of people and mission on the one side as against a program on the other. Because programs come and go. And sometimes program in the nonprofit world, some specific project. I've got some idea for really combating homelessness in Phoenix. Here's my program. I come pitch it to Michael Fragon. They got a really good idea, but it may not work, right? And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're not going to be you're going to get the most. If you really like the people and the mission behind that program, give them another chance. It'd be my point. Keep investing in them. Not everything works, and sometimes givers give up a little too quickly on things. The worst part is that you just what a nonprofit business needs is more than anything is unrestricted funds. Sometimes donors think that somehow irresponsible of them to give unrestricted funds. And I don't think that's the case. In most situations, that's not typically how you should feel. If you believe in the mission, people together as a unit, giving them the most degrees of freedom possible to invest your gift wherever it's necessary is the best thing you can possibly do for them. Because oftentimes what gets squeezed out is like spending on infrastructure, the CRM, the fundraising, marketing, blacktopping the driveway. That's not a waste of money. Businesses need all of that. And it's as if an investor in a for-profit business said, like, I'm only going to give you money. I'm buying these shares, but I only want my money to be invested in, product development. It just doesn't make any sense. Businesses are a holistic unit. In the nonprofit world, sometimes, for some reason, we don't tend to think of it that way. Did I answer your question?
Oh yeah, definitely,
Michael?
definitely.
Okay.
So, with regard to the history of philanthropy in this country, you wrote a book about it. And given that, part of the problem with everyone's got different priorities when it comes to charity and things like that. And the problem as a Catholic is that oftentimes the charity is sort of wrapped up in a lot of other things, as you point out in the description from your book from the website: fear and loathing of the poor, anti-Catholic prejudice, militarism, things like that, misguided progressivism, and the such, where we see these large groups really have these not necessarily bad goals, but clearly trying to create heaven on earth and sort of like have a wrong anthropology. There's that. But has there ever been a time throughout the history of charity, and again, charity and philanthropy, relatively modern constructs, because it would seem, because we've now got the leisure and the discretionary income to pursue them. Have you ever seen a time where the ideas of philanthropy they're so bipolar? Because, for instance, Catholics, we're fighting a progressive every time we turn around, there's a new billionaire ex-wife giving millions of dollars to Planned Parenthood. It's not just that they're giving mosquito nets, and
Yeah.
I don't care about mosquito nets as much as I care about saving souls. It's that they're giving money to the mosquitoes in that analogy. So are we at a unique time where everyone's idea of philanthropy is really, really, really disassociated?
Well, that's actually an interesting question. So progressivism, secular progressivism, and philanthropy have gone together in our nation's history. Philanthropy, that term, I mean, not the whole concept of giving, I mean, using that terminology, philanthropy. Philanthropy began to be used as a term in contradistinction to charity in around the late 1800s or late 1700s and really in the 1800s.
It's love of man rather than
Specific people.
that's love of man, right, in Greek.
Yeah, it's like philanthropy, and it's very love of mankind, right?
Right.
And that's actually the very idea behind it, as it was used by sort of Enlightenment-inspired reformers. It's like, I'm more globalist. I'll put it in contemporary terms. I'm more of a globalist than you are. I love all of mankind. You just love specific persons where they are currently embedded. Here, I can say actually exist. It's a very ambitious and often utopian and a progressive way of thinking about giving. And it was, as I say, developed as a concept in contradistinction to charity, which was thought to be not strategic enough, too Christian, tied up with all these theological concepts that are sort of weird, old-fashioned, didn't always get at root problems. It's just like feeding the poor rather than like, let's root out the systemic causes of poverty. Some of that may sound very rational to listeners, and it's because we all think this way now. And there's certainly nothing wrong with getting at root causes. But what happened over time was we forgot the people that were involved. What happened to them when we're getting at root causes? For example, this is the eugenics movement of the earlier part of the 20th century. That was all funded by the first philanthropic foundations and organizations that were really developed in the United States. Carnegie Foundation, Rockefeller, some others, Sage. They were very interested in eugenics because it promised to get at the root causes of illness and mental disease and
The problem is the root cause is always people.
It's
So
always
you're gonna get
people,
rid of
right?
people.
So at the end of the day, of course, what happened, we know, was tens of thousands of forced sterilizations, all sorts of
With the
other,
Supreme Court's blessing, mind
with
you.
the Supreme Court's blessing.
Yeah.
Also was captured by this way of thinking. And ultimately, it's not hard. I mean, there's some debate about this in the literature, but I think it's kind of hard to say that Nazism, this sort of doesn't owe something to these efforts. So that's a long way of saying, Doug, we've had this sort of secular progressives using philanthropic vehicles to fund things that are antithetical to Christian doctrine, morals, and practices for some time. And it's always it is what it is. It's always going to be an arena of battle like anything else, like any other sector that we have. Now, the challenge right now is that with until very recently, the rapidly declining church affiliation and religiosity among Americans, not only Americans, is sort of shift the balance, right? Where for a long time, there's this report called Giving USA that's published every year, and it breaks down giving into different sectors. And religion's always been the biggest thing that people give to. Organizations categorized as religious, it includes churches, right? A lot of giving goes to churches. That percentage has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, right? And the percentage of giving going to secular causes and organizations has been growing. Partly that's also because secular individuals give exclusively to secular causes, right? Religious individuals give to both. Religious individuals, by which we mean people who actually go to church and identify it with some religion, church or synagogue, and identify with some religion, they give more not only to religious causes, they give more to secular causes than do secular individuals. Because religious individuals just give way, 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 way more. By some estimates, 2 to 3 times more per year than do people who are irreligious. So the balance, it's all my long way of saying, is as the proportion of Americans who are called religious shrinks, and especially in the mega rich, I feel like I've never seen the data on this, but the proportion of the mega rich who are not religious seems to be really increasing too. I think what you're feeling, Doug, is like a shift. It really feel like overwhelmed by sort of secular progressive money in the philanthropic marketplace as opposed to religious or Christian money.
Well,
see
I'm
me
curious.
sorry, go ahead, Michael.
That way you said that religious outgive the secular, is that in a dollar amount or is that like per capita?
Per capita.
Okay.
I'm sorry, per capita.
Per person, basically, like more people, not necessarily more dollars. Do you know what the spread of dollars is?
Well, so
like
if you go by the Giving
secular
USA, it's hard to know because the Giving USA report breaks things down into categories like religion, arts and culture, health and human services, education. Well, if your arts and culture organization also has a religious sort of dimension, you're still categorized as arts and culture. If your school is a religious school, you're still categorized as education. So in fact, religious giving, it goes well beyond the religion slice of the pie in Giving USA, but they don't tell us what percentage of all the other sectors are also religious. So it's a long way to answer. I don't know. Yeah.
Do these, I kind of have a term that I use, but like I call hospital charity, where it's the kind of charity you do is get your name on the hospital, or you just, or just to go to the hospital event. It's the kind of thing that everyone can get behind, it seems like. So it's pretty easy to do because it sounds good. Now, could be the hospitals doing transgender surgeries for kids or things like that. Even the things everyone should get behind, not everyone should be getting behind.
Right.
But do you find that sort of societal giving, is that in all, how much BS does that create for you to have to fight through, things like that, where people are doing this for status and things like that? Does that impact you?
I like to harness that rather than fight through it.
Okay.
That's how
let me broaden that question just to give you that opportunity. So I guess my question is, when you're dealing with people who maybe are not or who are secular, and you have your background, your beliefs, obviously. What is your approach to advising and consulting them? Are you trying to really just find whatever it is they want, or are you trying to shape them or direct them in a certain way?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
I
so
don't
we
want to
don't.
get you in trouble, but
No, you're not going to be in trouble at all, because we don't work with, on the donor side. We're careful. We only work with people whose values are substantially aligned with ours. So
Okay.
we don't, not in too many situations where we're like, oh, geez, we gotta, because that's just a little too personal. I
Yeah.
think, for there not to be a substantial alignment. When we work with nonprofit organizations, we have a broader set of parameters, but we still have lines, and we don't work with a lot of a number of nonprofits who just are pursuing missions that are just not aligned at all with our own. Oftentimes, of course, in this business, you can't draw the lines, your boundaries too tightly. You can never work with anyone. I can't believe you waste your money on child cancer research. I mean, that's, if you're that tight, you can't work with anyone. So, you have to be professional and sometimes and broad-minded, but we don't get into that challenge you just mentioned, Michael, just because we just don't work with donors who are not aligned. But having said that, it goes back to antiquity, the getting your name on the building or the wall thing, right? In ancient Roman society, you gave away money precisely to augment your status in the populace. That is how you gain status.
Caesar gave until debt, basically, right? I mean,
bread and circuses, the whole thing, right? You gave votes, support, status, and it was so there was no anonymous giving. That'd be entirely against the entire reason you gave. So it's deeply embedded in human nature, I would say, Doug. And I don't think there's anything wrong with people having their names on the wall or the building or the school. In fact, oftentimes it's the nonprofit who really has to kind of beg them to let them do that. Now, why would they do that? And I'm often in these conversations, so I often would be saying, look, I know you don't want the honor, status, glory. That's not why you're doing this. That's not why you'd be making this gift. You're allowing us to use your name to publicize your gift will help us draw other people into supporting this mission. And I know that is what you want, right? You don't want your $250,000 gift to be the only one we receive. We can't build the building, right? Or the wing or whatever it is we're doing, So if we can use your name, that really helps, because you're highly respected among this community, among our donors, whatever it might be. So oftentimes you're getting talked into doing that. People aren't always doing that just for their own sort of ego. Sometimes, of course, they're honoring other people. People often name buildings after their parents or after somebody else who's been important to them in their lives, which I think is fine. I don't find what you're talking about to be that big of a deal. There are the galas and the events that people go to. It is like the place to be seen and to see and be seen.
I'm really mad I don't get invited. That's really what it comes down to.
They're unserious givers out there. But, for the most part, even the hospital charity, transgender surgeries aside, 80% of those funds are going to probably do something that's good. I tend not to get that bothered by that kind of thing. But it's not that hard to discern when you're working in the sector who's a serious giver and who is in it just for the PR. I just find that fewer, at least in the world that we live in, very few people are in it for the PR. They really are in it because of a deep conviction that this is something that they need to do.
I'm still trying to find a way to have money to give and then decline to have my name on the building and then let everyone know that I didn't want my name on the building.
Everybody has money to give, Doug. Everybody has money to give. We're all called to be givers. Doesn't matter the level, the widow's mite, etc.
Well, on that note, I mean, you mentioned the hospital example of, not worrying necessarily about the part of the funds that's not used the way exactly you want it. I've talked to lots of people in the Catholic world who, emphasize prudence in giving, make sure you know what you're giving to, make sure what you're doing, even if it sounds good, is actually doing. So it's interesting you brought up the utilitarian argument and these things, and to hear the opposite of like, don't worry too much. I guess my question is, what is your recommendation for people who maybe don't have the level of intimate knowledge of the industry that you have to be able to discern what it is? If you give to Catholic charities, maybe that's not the best use. Or if you buy shoes for people in Nigeria and it destroys the market for a shoe salesman there, that type of thing. How is the average person who maybe can't enlist your services able to make those decisions?
It's tough. It is tough. By the way, Catholic Charities here in Phoenix is very good. You can absolutely
Good to know.
Yeah. Some maybe some are less so. The shoe one, let me put that off to the side. That's
Okay.
a very interesting it's a very interesting question. The main advice I have on that, first of all, yes, I'm not arguing against being responsible with your giving or prudent,
Sure.
as you put it. I think you should, but I do think there's an obsession with that sometimes that betrays that we're not really detached from these resources that we're giving away. Like, are we trying to control things with these resources, or are we really giving it away and allowing God to do with it what he's going to do with it? So there's just a bit of a spiritual or interior question there that
you're releasing your stewardship over those resources at that point.
Yeah. At some point there has to be some release, it seems to me, or it's not really a gift. It's just another way in which I'm trying to exercise control over society, which maybe not be a bad thing. I think we should. We all kind of exercise our little ways of doing that, why we consume, the way we live, and so forth. But it could be a bad thing. It's not, or at least you're not going to get the same spiritual sort of benefit if that's the spirit in which you give. But to answer your question, nothing, if we're talking about giving at a reasonably substantial level, nothing substitutes for getting to know the people who are leading the organization, right? Actual relationship. So getting involved with the recipient of your gift. How do you do that? Well, if they're not willing to take a meeting with you and you're giving more than, somebody from the organization should be willing to meet with you if you're giving at least $500. I guess I'll put it that way. I think any level, but I mean, I don't want to throw anybody in the bus, and there could be very big organizations, but if you want to come do a tour, of the facility, or have a meeting, someone should be willing to meet with you. If they're not, that's a mark against them. That's a big mark against them. But of course, that they should really be reaching out to you if you're giving at least $1,000 for at least a meeting once a year. If they're doing it right, that's a good sign. Sometimes people get a little bit, I've noticed unsophisticated givers get a little bit annoyed that they're asked for meetings. No, that's a good sign. You don't have to take the meeting, but that's a good sign. It's a sign this organization is actually run well. They actually want to get to know you. They want to build a relationship with you. They want to know what moves you. Why are you giving? What do you hope to accomplish with your gift? If they're asking those questions, those are the right questions. That's great. They want to partner with you to make sure that there's alignment, right? And that your gift is achieving what you want it to achieve. But yeah, getting them to go volunteer, do anything you can to kind of, I would say, vet the organization. And you can kind of smell fraud oftentimes. Like, obviously, if you do a little bit of Google research, if there's anything about them being an outright fraud, I mean, that's good. And now I'm going to say the shoe thing. If anybody has mentioned something about like, you're giving it just distorting the marketplace in Namibia, and now there's no market for shoe salesmen there, and 1,000 people are out of work. I mean, okay, the model is broken for this charity, right? But if there's not anything like that out there, you really can't know. It's a good question to ask if they're doing the kind of work that could potentially displace like native market sort of providers. There's something.
Yeah, I know that was a big question.
It's a good sophisticated
hopefully
question.
Not many of them will be doing that.
But sometimes it does happen. I mean, it's a really reasonable question. But mainly, I think my best advice is get to know them.
Yeah.
Also, the more personally involved you are with your gift, the happier you're going to be with your giving, the more fulfilling you're going to find your giving anyway. If it's just more than a check. So if you get to know them, you guys know, you can tell who's not always not perfectly, but generally can tell who's really virtuous and who maybe isn't.
Yeah. Well, to follow up on that, Doug, you'll let me ask one more question. That makes me think, I have a question about, the, what was the term, I guess, ordo amoris that Vice President Vance had, caused to trend. Is there a value or do you recommend focusing more on your, more local, your local community rather than maybe more distant communities? Because when you're talking about getting to know these organizations, these people, it might be easier when you actually live near them.
You can also see the results of your gift more easily.
Right. So what's your thoughts on that, basically?
Yeah, first of all, yes, I think I love that he brought up the Ordo Amoris in the context of whatever debate that was. I think that was an immigration debate or something. And I was shocked that there were some Catholic voices who found it to be controversial, to be honest.
Really? Were you shocked?
Well, I was not shocked about the immigration part of it, but about the Ordo Amoris, that's not a thing. That doesn't mean what you think it means. It does, actually. It is a thing. And again, it's a very distinctively Christian way of thinking about what we owe others, right? And so I think actually I think it kind of revealed this sort of latent utilitarianism, maybe not so latent, let's say the implicit utilitarianism that is at work oftentimes in these sort of even Catholic sort of discussions of ethics, it's very utilitarian. So I thought it was spot on, actually. I thought it was a great intervention. I believe completely in the Ordo Amoris. So people don't know, it means there's an order of loves, naturally that is not superseded by Christian revelation or teaching. We owe naturally more to those who are closest to us. And then there's like circles that go on, radiate beyond that, right? Doug owes more to his wife than he does to me. He owes more to his wife than he does to his employer. He owes more to his colleagues than he does to, kind of barely known acquaintances. He knows that he owes more to his community than he does to so on and so forth. Like, that's just the order of nature. That's how we're made. We are embodied and fleshed, limited human beings who are placed in specific places at specific times. And I think it's the church, Augustine, Aquinas, others, very consistent in teaching that. And so I think the implication is exactly what you were drawing out, Michael, is that we are trying to discern how to give. The Ordo Amoris ought to help us in that discernment, right? Or be an element in that discernment. Now, some people are called to go be missionaries in distant places. Some people are called to give maybe the bulk of their philanthropic resources to distant places and causes. Again, I don't think there's like a one rule here, like a formula, like a Kantian sort of thing that we can just apply in a rigid way. But we generally owe more to families and then to our churches, our communities, and so forth. And there's a lot of wisdom tied up with that. As you said, it makes it easier to the people you're giving to, and therefore you hear, like we live in Phoenix, so we hear who's good and who isn't. If you just keep your ear to the ground and ask wise people, very quickly you can find out, like, oh, that they're really doing good work, and like, you get one of these on some other people, right? And it also allows us to see the results of our work, like literally see it. And the best way to know if your work is having an impact or results is if you can actually see it with your own eyes. I'm glad you brought up the Ordo Amoris. I think it's exactly right. It's totally apropos, and it should really help guide our giving decisions.
I want to close this out out of respect for Jeremy's time with a plug and then a series question, then a softball question that will turn into a plug. But we can't get past the fact that we're all in Phoenix. And the state of Arizona is a wonderful place. And to that point, Jeremy mentioned that the Catholic Charities here is good. The St. Vincent de Paul here is world class from everything I've seen. Yep. And I mean, there's some good things going on in the church and charities here in Phoenix. Maybe it's because our politicians are so clueless and we have to have them step it up. I wonder how some of these people get elected, even on either side of the aisle sometimes. So I think that, but my serious question is, what do you think about endowments? There's legitimate debate within the people of goodwill as to whether they're even a good thing. Do you have it? So yay, nay, or pass?
I got a complicated answer to that. I mean, again, okay. I wouldn't presume to answer for everyone. I hope keep coming back to this, but like oftentimes there's a we should do this, but there are multiple we's and multiple situations. I think there are situations where okay, so you want me? I'll answer from a giving perspective. Is that what you're asking from, or from an organization?
Either. What do you think endowments are a good thing? Like what?
I mean, so endowments are one of the most sort of ancient of giving vehicles, right? I mean, it's the very first sort of charitable giving in the church, beyond sort of to the local church for the poor, was starting endowments for monasteries and convents, right? So that they had an income that would allow them to do their spiritual work without always having to beg for their bread, literally. So endowments are a very old kind of way of doing philanthropy in the Christian world. And so it seems weird to say they have no place. Now, it's a good question whether people are doing active work in the world whose work is not just spiritual, but it's sort of the corporal works of mercy, and whether those organizations should have endowments or large endowments, or whether all that money would be better deployed today, right now, for those in need, and trusting in God to continue to provide, and trusting in your own well-oiled fundraising machine to continue to provide for tomorrow's needs. I don't have a personal answer on that, Doug, and if I did, I probably wouldn't give it to you right now because I have organizations and givers on both sides of this. But it is a real debate, and it is a real question. I think everybody should really think about that for themselves. Before you give to endowment, you might think, wait, do I want this? Is my interest here? I want this institution to survive forever, and this is really going to help that. That's great. Or is like my interest here, like I want people to be helped right now, today, and that's what I'm giving this money for. I think it's legitimately you could come to a different answer depending on who you are and your circumstances in the organization.
I'll edit it out if you want. So I think your answer was great. I think it covered itself. So
I'm more skeptical of endowments than many people are. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
From an organizational standpoint, I think people sometimes are not trusting enough in God's providence, number one, and two, sometimes endowments a crutch. Like I don't believe and I don't want to invest in fundraising. And so let me just see if I can raise $100 million for an endowment. We'll never have to do this again. I think it's a wrong way to think about things.
Michael, you have a question? My softball. I'll save it for the end.
All right. I just want to we should ask all of our guests this question, but what does stewardship mean to you? Or what does it mean to be a steward? I want to get your perspective.
Yeah. So I think very quickly, stewarding, again, think of an organization, is using a gift wisely. Gift of our talent wisely, gift of our time wisely, the gift of our resources wisely, or the gift of someone's financial gift to me wisely. I think wisely covers a lot of things there. So, if your organization, it would mean using a gift wisely would mean using it in accord with the intent of the giver, and it would mean using it to advance the mission that you have proclaimed for yourself. So I think, in a nutshell, that's what it means. It means using a gift wisely. Now, but I think wisdom has multiple components, and it just depends on exactly what kind of stewardship we're talking about at that point.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. That's all I have. So, Doug, you
My
can ask
closing
me about
shot
that
is.
question.
Sorry, Michael. Didn't mean to
Closing
step on you.
shot? I thought it was a closing plug. I know it was a closing
question.
shot.
If you want to know about Jeremy's books, he's written about a variety of subjects. Go to thejeremybeer.com. They're spelled like the drink, and you can find out more. And I'm going to pick Jeremy's, judging by Amazon reviews, Jeremy's most popular book.
Yes.
Simply a crude metric, but a metric nonetheless, because it's very, very well received, well praised on Amazon. Why should people care about Oscar Charleston?
So Oscar Charleston, you're right, by the way. That's the book that is sold by far the best. He was a baseball player. He played in the Negro Leagues, starting in the mid-19 teens to the 1930s. You should care about him because he's the greatest forgotten athlete in the history of American sports. And beyond that, a really fascinating man who deserves to be remembered and doesn't deserve to be thrown into the sort of dustbin of history merely because he was of the wrong race.
Talk about a bad combination, but the wrong race at the wrong time. Also, he didn't have any kids.
That too. Yeah. So there's no one has been alive, no one descendants to carry his, to tend his flame. And so I was happy to be able to write that biography to do that for him.
Yeah.
So a quick follow-up, though, that beyond his athletic greatness, because there's an argument some people say have claimed, knowledgeable people have claimed he's the greatest. A few,
Possibly.
right?
Yeah.
So there's a few, but that say that. Beyond his athletic gifts, why were you drawn to him?
From Indiana.
Okay. Just like Jeremy and me.
The straight up answer, Doug, it was pure what Michael was getting to before. Ordo amoris.
Okay.
Local pride.
All right.
I'm glad that you exercise stewardship of that story so that you could, pass it on to more generations. We'll have to have you on again to talk about that book and your other books. As a historian obviously has a great role as a steward. So
that's true.
Definitely have to talk about that again at some point.
Sure, and we'll shut it down by one more plug for Jeremy's personal website, thejeremybeer.com, for all his books, but also AmPhil's website, amphil.com, short for their former name, American Philanthropic. So go check it out if you need, if you have an interest in Jeremy's subjects of authorship and also his primary business. So Jeremy, thanks for joining us so much. Great conversation, great work. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Doug and Michael. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeremy.
All
right, Doug, you want to give the last plug for our company as well?
Oh yeah, one more. I should mention it. Go to taylorforgone.com to find out more about us. And also we've got a Substack there that you can subscribe to. And Michael does a lot of work there, not all of it, but a lot of it. And you can read more about our companies and what we're into and our thoughts on finances and stewardship.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.